"Sir, please. I'm not here to cause trouble." The words barely left Isaiah Brooks' lips before the sound of rejection cut through the crisp morning air, sharp enough to silence even the low murmur of wedding guests gathering on the wide stone steps of St. Matthew's Church. Conversations faltered. Shoes paused mid-step. For a fleeting second, everything held still, as if the world itself hesitated to decide what would happen next. Isaiah staggered back half a step, not from force, but from the weight of the moment, his worn boots scraping softly against the cold marble beneath him. His coat, frayed at the cuffs and faded from years under sun and rain, hung loosely over his thin frame, carrying the faint scent of the streets he had called home for far too long. Around him, polished leather shoes gleamed under the soft morning light, heels clicking with quiet precision, each step belonging to someone who did not see him, or worse, chose not to. Daniel Whitmore stood tall at the top of the steps, his tailored suit crisp, his posture rigid with authority. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The set of his jaw, the narrowed gaze, the subtle tightening of his grip on the clipboard in his hand spoke volumes. This was his domain, his event, his responsibility to keep everything flawless. And Isaiah, in his eyes, was a disruption that didn't belong in the picture. "You need to leave," Daniel said, each word measured, controlled, final. A breeze moved through the courtyard, lifting the edge of Isaiah's coat and carrying with it the faint echo of organ music from inside the church, soft and distant, like a memory trying to break through. Isaiah swallowed, his throat dry, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. He didn't step forward. He didn't argue. Instead, he glanced past Daniel, just for a second, toward the open doors where warm golden light spilled onto the steps, where the scent of fresh flowers drifted outward, where something sacred and unreachable seemed to exist just beyond his grasp. I just wanted to see her," Isaiah said quietly, almost to himself, his voice fragile but steady enough to carry. A few guests exchanged glances. One woman adjusted her hat, her lips pressing into a thin line. A man near the entrance shifted uncomfortably, checking his watch as if time itself might excuse him from witnessing the moment. Daniel's expression didn't change. If anything, it hardened, the faintest flicker of impatience crossing his face. "This is a private event," he replied, his tone clipped. "You're not on the list." The words landed heavier than they should have. Not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. Isaiah nodded slowly, as if he had expected nothing else. His eyes lingered on the doorway again, drawn to the light, to the life inside that he wasn't allowed to touch. The organ music swelled slightly, a gentle rise and fall that seemed to press against his chest. He took a small step back, then stopped, his breath catching for just a moment. "I won't stay," he said softer now. "Just 1 minute. That's all." No one moved. The silence stretched thin, fragile, like glass about to crack. Somewhere behind them, a car door closed. A distant bell chimed once. The world continued, but here, on these steps, everything remained suspended between dignity and dismissal. Daniel exhaled slowly, his patience thinning, his grip tightening just enough to reveal the strain beneath his composure. "You've already taken more than a minute," he said. And still, Isaiah didn't turn away. Not yet. Not when he had come this far. Isaiah did not turn away because turning away meant accepting that this was all he deserved. A single glance at a life he once held and then lost to time, to silence, to choices that had carved distance deeper than miles ever could. The morning air pressed gently against his skin, cool and steady, carrying the faint scent of lilies and polished wood drifting from inside the church, a scent that felt painfully familiar, like something he had known long before the world had stripped him down to what stood here now. His fingers curled slightly at his sides, rough and weathered, nails edged with the kind of wear that came from years of survival rather than comfort. And yet there was care in the way he held himself, a quiet dignity that refused to collapse even under the weight of 100 unseen judgments. A memory flickered behind his eyes, uninvited but persistent, of a much smaller hand wrapped tightly around his finger, of laughter echoing in a cramped apartment where the heater rattled louder than it warmed, of a little girl in a white dress that had been just slightly too big because it was all he could afford, spinning in place and asking if she looked like a princess. He had told her yes, every single time, even when the lights flickered, even when the rent was overdue, even when he knew that someday she would step into a world that demanded more than he could ever give. The sound of a car engine idling at the curb pulled him back, the present settling over him like a heavy coat he could not remove. Guests continued to arrive, their voices low, controlled, careful not to disturb the fragile elegance of the moment. Yet their eyes lingered just long enough to mark him as something out of place, something that did not belong in the frame of polished marble and stained glass. Daniel shifted his stance, the subtle movement of authority reasserting itself, his polished shoes planted firmly, as if the ground itself answered to him. "This is not the place," he said, quieter now, but no less firm, as though lowering his voice made the dismissal more refined, more acceptable. Isaiah nodded once more, the motion slow, deliberate, as if he were agreeing with something deeper than the words being spoken, something he had learned long ago about doors that stayed closed no matter how gently you knocked. "I know," he replied, his voice steady, carrying no anger, only a quiet understanding that seemed to unsettle more than defiance ever could. He glanced again toward the open doors, and for a moment, the light shifted just enough to illuminate the interior beyond, rows of white flowers lining the aisle, ribbons tied with careful precision, a space prepared for a moment that would change someone's life forever. His chest tightened, not with regret, but with something softer, something closer to hope that refused to fully disappear. He had imagined this day in fragments over the years, never daring to picture himself within it, only at its edges, unseen, unheard, but present enough to know that she was safe, that she had found a life untouched by the struggles that had defined his own. "She is going to be beautiful," he murmured, almost too quietly to be heard, the words slipping out as though they belonged to a different time. A woman standing nearby hesitated, her expression shifting from discomfort to something more uncertain, as if she had caught a glimpse of a story she did not understand. Daniel followed Isaiah's gaze, just briefly, toward the doorway, then back again, his composure tightening, unwilling to allow even a second of doubt to take root. "You need to go now," he said, more firmly this time, the finality returning to his tone like a door closing with a soft but unmistakable click. Isaiah drew in a slow breath, the kind that steadied the heart even when nothing else could. His shoulders lifted slightly, then settled, as if he were preparing to leave, to disappear back into the spaces where no one asked questions and no one expected answers. But his feet did not move. Not yet. Not when the sound of footsteps from inside began to approach, faint at first, then clearer, the soft rhythm of something important drawing closer to the threshold between two worlds. The footsteps grew clearer with each passing second, soft against the polished floor inside the church, measured and deliberate, carrying a rhythm that did not belong to the hurried movements of guests or the quiet efficiency of staff, but to something slower, something intentional, something that demanded space without asking for it. Isaiah's breath caught just slightly, his eyes lifting again toward the open doors as the light shifted with movement from within, shadows stretching and folding across the marble threshold like a silent announcement. Daniel noticed it too, the subtle change in the air, the way conversations behind him softened into near silence, the way heads began to turn not toward Isaiah anymore, but toward the interior where something important was unfolding. He straightened instinctively, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve, his posture aligning with the expectation of order he had spent years perfecting. This was the moment everything had to remain flawless, untouched by disruption, untouched by anything that did not belong. He stepped slightly to the side, positioning himself between Isaiah and the entrance, not aggressively, but with the quiet certainty of someone used to being obeyed without question. "This is your last warning," he said under his breath, low enough that only Isaiah could hear, the words carrying a weight that did not need volume to be understood. Isaiah did not respond immediately. Instead, his gaze remained fixed on the doorway, his eyes reflecting the light in a way that made them seem almost distant, as if he were seeing something beyond the present, something layered beneath the surface of this moment. Another memory surfaced, uninvited yet impossible to ignore, of standing outside a school auditorium years ago, dressed in his only clean shirt, waiting by the doors because he had been told there was no space left inside, listening to the muffled sound of applause as his daughter performed on a stage he was not allowed to see. He had stayed anyway, leaning against the brick wall, counting every second until the doors opened and she ran out, searching the crowd until she found him, her smile brighter than anything he had ever known. He had promised himself then that he would never miss another moment, that he would always be there, even if it meant standing outside, even if it meant being unseen. The present pressed back in as the footsteps reached the edge of the doorway, and then, slowly, a figure appeared just within the frame of light. Not fully revealed, not yet, but enough to shift the air again, enough to draw every eye forward. The fabric of a white gown caught the sunlight, soft and luminous, the delicate movement of lace brushing against the floor with a whisper that seemed louder than any voice. A hush fell over the steps, deeper than before, heavier, as if the world itself recognized the significance of what was about to happen. Isaiah's fingers trembled, just slightly, the smallest movement betraying the storm beneath his calm exterior. He did not step forward. He did not call out. He simply stood there, rooted in place, his entire being held together by a single fragile thread of hope and restraint. Daniel's expression tightened, his control slipping just enough to reveal a flicker of uncertainty. This was not part of the plan. The timing was off. The presence of the man behind him, still unmoved, still refusing to disappear, created a tension he could not easily resolve. He glanced back briefly, his eyes meeting Isaiah's for the first time with something other than dismissal, something closer to irritation edged with confusion. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice sharper now, the patience thinning into something more brittle. Isaiah finally shifted his gaze, meeting Daniel's eyes with a calm that did not match the intensity of the moment. "I am not trying to make anything hard," he replied softly. "I am just trying to keep a promise." The words lingered between them, simple and unadorned, yet heavy enough to settle into the silence that followed. Behind Daniel, the figure in white took another step forward, the light expanding around her, the edges of her presence becoming clearer, more defined. Guests straightened, breaths held, anticipation building in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. And still, Isaiah did not move. Not away, not forward. He remained exactly where he was, standing at the edge of a moment that was about to change everything. The light from the doorway widened as she stepped forward, slow and deliberate, the soft sweep of her gown trailing behind her like a quiet echo of everything this day was meant to be, pure, untouched, carefully planned down to the smallest detail. And yet something in the air had already shifted, something fragile beneath the surface now beginning to crack. Olivia Brooks did not rush. She moved with the calm grace expected of her, her posture straight, her chin slightly lifted, every movement shaped by months of preparation and a lifetime of expectations. But her eyes did not follow the aisle ahead. They moved outward, scanning, searching, drawn towards something beyond the rows of guests and the carefully arranged flowers, toward the edge where the light met the shadow. Daniel noticed it immediately, the subtle deviation from perfection, the way her focus broke from the script he had mentally rehearsed 100 times. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with irritation sharpened by control slipping just out of reach. "Stay focused," he murmured under his breath, though the words were not meant for her, more a command to the moment itself, as if he could pull everything back into alignment by sheer will. Isaiah saw her before she fully saw him. The outline of her figure, the way she carried herself, the quiet strength in her posture. It was unmistakable even from a distance that stretched years wide. His breath caught, held for just a second too long, his chest rising but not falling, as if time had paused inside him while the world continued moving forward. He did not call her name. He did not raise a hand. He simply stood there, absorbing the sight of her, the reality of her, as though committing it to memory in case this was the only moment he would be allowed. A breeze moved again, gentle this time, lifting a strand of her hair, carrying the faint scent of roses across the steps, and with it came something else, something unspoken that seemed to pass through the space between them like a quiet recognition waiting to be acknowledged. Olivia slowed. It was almost imperceptible, a fraction of a second hesitation in her step, but it was enough. Enough for those watching closely to feel it, enough for the rhythm of the moment to falter just slightly. Her eyes narrowed, not in confusion, but in focus, as if something in the distance had called to her without sound. Daniel shifted again, stepping forward just enough to block the line of sight, his movement smooth, practiced, designed to redirect without drawing attention. "Everything is fine," he said quietly, his voice controlled, reassuring, the tone of someone accustomed to managing disruptions before they fully formed. But Olivia did not respond. Her gaze moved past him, over his shoulder, beyond the line he had drawn, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to narrow to a single point where two realities were about to collide. Isaiah felt it then, not as a thought, not as a decision, but as something deeper, something instinctive that rose within him like a tide he could not hold back forever. His fingers tightened slightly, his shoulders lifting with a breath that finally released, and though he remained still, there was a shift in him, a quiet readiness that had not been there before. Around them, the guests sensed it too, the subtle tension threading through the air, the way conversations had completely dissolved now, replaced by a silence that carried expectation instead of comfort. Daniel's composure strained at the edges, his eyes flicking once more toward Isaiah, then back to Olivia, calculating, adjusting, trying to regain control of a moment that was no longer entirely his to command. "Please," he said, this time with a hint of urgency beneath the surface, "we need to proceed." But Olivia had already taken another step forward, slower than before, her attention no longer divided, no longer uncertain, but fixed, steady, and unmistakably drawn toward the truth waiting just beyond the line that had been set for her. And in that space, between the polished order of what was planned and the raw reality of what was real, everything began to shift. The distance between them no longer felt like space measured in feet or steps, but something heavier, something built from years of silence and unanswered questions. And yet it was closing, slowly, inevitably, with every breath Olivia took as she moved forward against the invisible line that had been set for her. The soft rustle of her gown against the stone steps echoed in the stillness, each movement drawing more attention, more awareness, until every eye present was no longer watching a ceremony, but witnessing a moment that no one had prepared for. Daniel felt it slipping, the careful structure he had built around this day beginning to fracture under something he could not control. His jaw tightened, his hand lifting slightly as if to guide her back, to redirect, to restore order before it was too late. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice low but firm, carrying just enough authority to be heard without breaking the fragile silence. "We need to keep moving." But she did not stop. She did not even acknowledge him. Her focus had narrowed completely now, her eyes locked onto the figure standing at the edge of everything. The man who had not moved, who had not spoken, who had simply remained, as if his presence alone carried a truth too heavy to be ignored any longer. Isaiah felt her gaze before he fully understood it, a quiet pull that settled deep in his chest, steady and undeniable. His breath slowed, his shoulders lowering slightly as something within him shifted from hesitation to acceptance. He had not come here to disrupt, not to take anything away, but standing here now, with her eyes finding him, he realized that leaving without being seen would be the real betrayal. A murmur rippled through the guests, subtle at first, then growing just enough to be felt, a wave of curiosity mixed with discomfort, as people leaned slightly, trying to understand what they were witnessing without fully asking the question forming in their minds. Daniel stepped forward again, this time more deliberately, placing himself squarely between Olivia and the direction she was moving, his presence a barrier shaped by control and expectation. "Please," he said, the words sharper now, edged with urgency. "This is not appropriate." The statement hung in the air, polished and controlled, yet it landed with a weight that felt misplaced against the quiet gravity of the moment unfolding. Olivia stopped, not because of him, but because she had reached the point where certainty replaced doubt. Her breath came in slow, measured pulls, her chest rising and falling as she stood there, just a few steps away from the truth she had been drawn toward without understanding why. Her eyes did not waver. They held steady, fixed on Isaiah with a focus that cut through everything else. For a second, neither of them moved. The world seemed to contract around them, the edges of sound fading until only the faint rustle of fabric and the distant hum of wind remained. Isaiah's hands trembled again, slightly more this time, not from fear, but from the weight of recognition pressing closer, closer than he had allowed himself to imagine. He could see it now, not just the outline, not just the posture, but the details, the way she held her shoulders when she was unsure, the way her eyes searched before settling, the same quiet determination that had once lived in a little girl who refused to give up even when the world told her she should. Daniel's patience broke at the edges, the strain finally surfacing in his voice as he spoke again, louder this time, no longer concerned with subtlety. This man needs to leave now. The words cut through the silence, drawing a sharp line, forcing the moment into something defined, something confrontational. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. One man near the back cleared his throat, but said nothing. The tension thickened, heavy and unavoidable. Isaiah lowered his gaze for a brief moment, not in defeat, but in thought, as if weighing something within himself. Then he looked back up, his eyes meeting Olivia's fully now, without distance, without hesitation. He did not speak. He did not need to. Because in that moment, something passed between them, something deeper than explanation, something that could not be contained by the boundaries Daniel was trying to enforce. And as Olivia took one final step forward, closing the distance that had held them apart for years, the entire world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The air did not move, yet everything felt like it was shifting, slow and heavy, like the moment just before a storm finally breaks. Except there was no thunder here. Only silence stretched so thin it felt like it could shatter at the smallest sound. Olivia stood still, her breath shallow now, her chest rising just enough to show that she was still anchored to the present, even as something deeper pulled at her from a place she could not fully name. The light from behind her wrapped around her silhouette, soft and warm, but it did not reach Isaiah the same way. He stood just beyond it, half in shadow, half in that fading edge of gold, as if he belonged to both worlds and neither at the same time. For a long second, no one spoke. Not Daniel, not the guests, not even the quiet murmur of the wind dared to interrupt what was forming between them. Isaiah's eyes held steady, not pleading, not demanding, simply present, carrying a weight that could not be explained by appearance alone. His breathing had slowed, controlled now, but his hands remained still at his sides, fingers slightly curled, as though he was holding on to something invisible, something that had kept him standing through years that had stripped away everything else. Olivia's gaze traced his face slowly, not with recognition yet, but with a searching intensity that felt almost instinctive. There was something there, something in the way he stood, the way he looked at her without expectation, without entitlement, just a quiet presence that felt painfully familiar. Her brow softened slightly, her lips parting just enough as if she were about to say something, but the words did not come. Instead, her attention dropped for a brief second, drawn to the smallest detail, the edge of his sleeve, worn thin at the cuff, and beneath it, a glimpse of skin marked by time and labor. And then she saw it. Not all at once, not like a sudden revelation, but like a memory rising slowly to the surface, piece by piece. A faint scar along his wrist, barely visible unless you knew where to look, a small, uneven line that caught the light just enough to stand out. Her breath hitched, soft but audible in the stillness. That scar. A memory flickered behind her eyes, distant but sharp, of a much younger version of herself sitting on a kitchen counter, legs swinging, watching as her father wrapped his wrist in a cloth after a long day of work, smiling at her even though the pain was still fresh. He had told her it was nothing, just a scratch, but she had insisted on placing a bandage over it, her small hands careful, determined, as if she could fix the world with enough attention. The image lingered, overlapping with the man standing before her now, and for a moment, the distance between past and present collapsed into something undeniable. Daniel saw the shift before he understood it, the way Olivia's posture changed, the way her focus sharpened into something that no longer belonged to the ceremony he had orchestrated. "We need to move," he said again, his voice tighter now, less controlled, the strain evident as he tried to pull her back into the moment he believed he still governed. But she did not respond. She took a slow step forward instead, the fabric of her gown brushing softly against the stone, the sound impossibly loud in the silence that surrounded them. Isaiah did not move. He could not. Not because he was unable, but because something inside him told him that this was not his step to take. This was hers. The guests watched, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something deeper, something closer to realization, though no one spoke it aloud. The world seemed to narrow again, not to a single point this time, but to a fragile thread connecting two people who had been separated by more than distance. Olivia's hand lifted slightly, hesitant, as if reaching for something just beyond her grasp, then paused midair, uncertainty flickering across her face. Her eyes returned to his, searching, questioning, needing something to confirm what her heart was beginning to understand before her mind could fully accept it. And in that quiet space, where no one else dared to interfere, the truth began to take shape, not in words, but in recognition that could no longer be denied. The moment did not explode. It unfolded, slow and undeniable, like a truth that had waited too long to be spoken and could no longer remain hidden beneath silence and distance. Olivia's hand, still suspended between them, trembled just slightly before it lowered halfway, not in retreat, but in disbelief that had not yet found its voice. Her eyes locked onto Isaiah's with a clarity that erased everything else, the guests, the ceremony, the carefully arranged world behind her, all fading into something distant and irrelevant. "That scar," she whispered, the words barely more than breath, yet they carried across the stillness with a weight that shifted the air itself. Isaiah's chest tightened, not with fear, but with the quiet recognition that this was the moment he had both hoped for and tried to prepare himself to never receive. He did not step forward. He did not reach out. He simply nodded once, slow and gentle, as if acknowledging something sacred rather than claiming it. Olivia's breath caught, sharper this time, her composure cracking at the edges as memory and reality collided fully, no longer fragments, no longer uncertain. "You used to say it was nothing," she continued, her voice trembling now, no longer controlled, no longer distant. "You said it would heal, and I believed you." A murmur rippled through the crowd, no longer subtle, no longer contained, as people began to understand that this was not a misunderstanding, not a disruption, but something deeply personal, something that had no place in the script they had come to witness, yet demanded to be seen. Daniel's expression shifted, the certainty that had defined him now faltering under something he could not command. He glanced between them, his control unraveling in small, visible cracks, the realization dawning too late that the man he had tried to remove was not an outsider to this moment, but at its very center. "Olivia," he said, his voice strained, attempting to regain some footing, some authority. "This is not the time for." She turned toward him, not sharply, not angrily, but with a quiet finality that silenced him before he could finish. Her gaze held his for only a second, but it was enough. Enough to make him stop. Enough to make him understand that whatever control he believed he had was gone. She looked back at Isaiah, her eyes now filled with something deeper than recognition, something closer to grief, to longing, to a question that had lived inside her for years without answer. "They told me you were gone," she said, her voice breaking on the last word, the weight of it settling heavily between them. Isaiah's lips parted slightly, but no words came at first. His throat tightened, emotion rising in a way he had spent years learning to hold back, to bury beneath survival and silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, steady, but carried a depth that could not be mistaken. "I never left you," he said. The simplicity of it cut through everything. No explanation, no defense, just truth, offered without demand, without expectation. Olivia's eyes filled, the tears not falling yet, but gathering, reflecting the light that surrounded them. "Then where were you?" she asked, not accusing, not angry, but searching, needing something to fill the space that had defined so much of her life. Isaiah lowered his gaze for a brief moment, then lifted it again, meeting hers fully, without hesitation. "Close enough to see you grow," he answered quietly. "Far enough not to take anything from you." The words settled into the silence, heavier than anything that had been spoken before, reshaping the moment into something no one present would ever forget. Olivia's breath faltered, her hand lifting again, this time without hesitation, reaching toward him fully, closing the last distance between uncertainty and truth. And in that single movement, everything changed. Her hand reached him before her thoughts could catch up, fingers brushing against his sleeve with a hesitation that lasted less than a second before it turned into something real, something certain, something she could not take back even if she wanted to. The fabric beneath her touch was rough, worn thin by time, but the warmth beneath it was unmistakable, grounding her in a truth that no explanation could replace. Isaiah did not pull away. He did not move at all at first, as if even the smallest motion might break whatever fragile bridge had formed between them. His eyes softened, the guarded stillness he had carried for so long easing just enough to reveal something deeper, something that had never left, no matter how far life had pushed him from this moment. Olivia's breath trembled as she stepped closer, closing the last inches between them, her hand tightening slightly on his sleeve, as if confirming that he was real, that he would not disappear the moment she blinked. "You let me believe you were gone," she said, her voice unsteady now, not loud, but filled with years of unanswered questions, years of quiet nights where she had wondered what had happened, what she had missed, what she had lost without knowing why. Isaiah lowered his head slightly, not in shame, but in acknowledgement of the pain behind her words. "I let you believe you were safe," he answered softly, his voice carrying a calm that did not deny the weight of what he had done, but also did not defend it. The distinction settled between them, complex and heavy, but real. Around them, the silence deepened again, no longer uncertain, but attentive, as if every person present understood that they were witnessing something that did not belong to them, something too personal to interrupt. Daniel stood frozen a few steps away, the clipboard still in his hand, but forgotten now, his posture no longer rigid with control, but uncertain, as if he no longer knew where he fit within this moment. His eyes moved from Olivia's hand gripping Isaiah's sleeve to Isaiah's face, then back again, the realization settling in fully that his earlier judgment, his dismissal, had been not only misplaced, but deeply wrong. He took a small step back without realizing it, creating space where before he had tried to close it. Olivia shook her head slightly, her emotions shifting from confusion to something sharper, something clearer. "You should have told me," she said, her voice gaining strength, though it still trembled beneath the surface. "I had a right to know." Isaiah met her gaze fully, steady and unwavering. "You had a right to a life without my mistakes following you," he replied. "And I was not sure I could give you that if I stayed." The honesty in his words did not soften the pain, but it gave it shape, something tangible she could hold instead of the emptiness she had carried for so long. Her grip on his sleeve loosened slightly, not because she was letting go, but because she no longer needed to hold on to prove he was there. Instead, her hand shifted, slowly, carefully, until her fingers wrapped around his, the contact no longer tentative, but intentional. Isaiah's hand, rough and steady, closed gently around hers, the contrast between them visible, undeniable, yet fitting in a way that words could not explain. A quiet exhale moved through the crowd, not quite a sigh, not quite relief, but something close, as if the tension that had built had finally found a place to rest. Daniel looked down briefly, his expression tightening, not with anger, but with something closer to regret, the weight of his earlier actions settling into a realization he could not ignore. He opened his mouth slightly, as if to speak, then stopped, understanding for the first time that this was not his moment to control, not his place to correct. Olivia took another step closer, her gown brushing softly against Isaiah's worn shoes, the distance between their worlds collapsing completely now. Her voice softened again, quieter, but steadier than before. "You are here now," she said, not as a question, but as a statement, as something she was choosing to accept rather than doubt. Isaiah nodded once, his grip on her hand gentle but firm. "I am here," he answered. And for the first time since he had stepped onto those stone steps, he allowed himself to stand not at the edge of the moment, but inside it. The world did not return to normal, not immediately, not in the way anyone had expected when they arrived that morning dressed in polished shoes and quiet assumptions, because something deeper had shifted, something that could not be undone by simply continuing the ceremony as planned. The light through the stained glass windows seemed softer now, warmer, casting colors across the stone steps that no longer felt cold or distant, but alive, as if the space itself had begun to breathe differently. Olivia did not let go of Isaiah's hand. Not when the silence lingered, not when the guests shifted in their places, not even when the weight of the moment settled fully into the reality of what it meant. Instead, her grip steadied, her fingers fitting more naturally against his, as if they had found something that had always been there, waiting beneath years of absence and unanswered questions. Isaiah stood beside her, not ahead, not behind, but beside, his posture no longer held by restraint alone, but by something quieter, something earned, a presence that did not demand space, yet could no longer be pushed out of it. His eyes moved briefly across the faces watching them, not in challenge, not in defiance, but in quiet acknowledgement that he was seen now, fully, undeniably, and that this time, he would not step away. Daniel remained where he had stopped, the distance he had created now feeling larger than it was, not because of space, but because of understanding that had come too late to prevent what had already happened. His shoulders lowered slightly, the rigid control dissolving into something more human, something that recognized the limits of authority when faced with truth. He looked at Isaiah, then at Olivia, and for the first time, there was no judgment in his expression, only a quiet awareness of the mistake he had made and the humility that followed it. He did not speak. He did not interrupt. He simply stepped back another inch, then another, until he was no longer part of the space between them. Olivia turned slightly, her gaze shifting toward the open doors behind her, where the aisle waited, lined with flowers, with expectation, with a future that had been carefully arranged but now felt different, fuller, more real than it had just moments before. She looked back at Isaiah, her eyes steady, no longer searching, no longer uncertain. "Walk with me," she said, her voice soft but clear, carrying across the stillness with a quiet strength that did not need to rise to be heard. Isaiah hesitated for only a fraction of a second, not from doubt, but from the weight of what that invitation meant, what it changed, what it restored. Then he nodded, once, simple and sure, and took a step forward with her. The movement was small, just one step, but it carried more meaning than anything that had happened that day. The guests parted without being asked, creating a path that had not been planned but felt more right than anything else that had been arranged. No one spoke. No one questioned. They simply moved, making space for something they now understood was not a disruption, but a completion. The sound of their steps was soft against the floor, steady, measured, each one grounding the moment further into reality. The light followed them as they crossed the threshold together, the warmth no longer stopping at the doorway, but extending fully around them, wrapping them in something that felt less like ceremony and more like truth. Isaiah's hand remained in Olivia's, firm but gentle, his presence no longer at the edge, no longer outside, but exactly where it had always belonged. Behind them, the world they had stepped through remained quiet, reflective, changed in a way that would not be spoken about in words, but remembered in the way silence had held everything together. And as they moved forward, side by side, the only thing that remained was the quiet rhythm of their steps and the unspoken understanding that some things, no matter how far they are pushed away, find their way back not with noise, but with presence.